Doesn't happen often, Clay, but sometimes Star Trek makes me laugh out loud. And in this one, I think cementing Tuvok is one of my favorite characters. His opening here in the teaser where they're talking about playing whatever they're playing, billiards or whatever they're playing, pool, I guess is what we learned that they're actually playing and not billiards. His thing about he's going to beat the safety by like hitting 7 banks and then, you know, careening into the 7 ball or whatever he needs, and it's going to knock it right in. And then he just lines up the shot and just like shanks it cleanly into the corner pocket. I don't know. I found that extremely funny. It was so, they didn't even bother like having him hit any of the bank shots or anything and just miss it by like a millimeter or something. And then have him say, oh, I think the alignment protocols are off on the ship. He couldn't hit a worse shot. He just shanked it right into the pocket, and it's just like, well, what the hell are you going to do? That's pool, baby. Yeah.
I found that funny because I did like the joke, but then the follow-up when fake Kramer was like, well, I guess you didn't tell you that the table kind of banks to the left. Came after the discussion that Tuvok had just been cleaning house. So clearly that didn't matter before.
What happened to him in that case then? What went wrong with that shot? Just a sweaty palms or something like that?
Yeah, he's, flew too close to the sun with that one, I guess.
Is that a professional way to hold the cue stick? He held it like in the circle of his finger. Like if you're making a 0, he had like the cue in there. I was never taught that was an appropriate way to play. Is there an appropriate way to do it? I was always
through the finger.
Through two fingers? I was always taught to make like your thumb, this is the video podcast, to put it on the crook of your thumb right here.
Oh, sure.
Sure. So you like lay your hand down and sort of bounce it off that. Maybe there's no official way to do it. I wonder if the rules have anything to say.
Whatever works, I guess.
We're not billiards pool experts. So we're here to talk about Jetrel, the jet setting episode. It's the 15th penultimate episode of season 1. There's only one left after this. Came out on May 15th, 1995. This is the first season of Voyager, if I didn't mention that. This one is teleplay goes to Jack Klein, Karen Klein, and Kenneth Biller. Story credit goes to James Thornton and Scott Nimmerfro, I guess. Directed by Kim Friedman. In universe date 48832.12371. In this episode called Jetrel, the scientist who developed a weapon that killed 300,000 of Neelix's people in a war 15 years ago, boards Voyager, claiming that Neelix is terminally ill. James Sloyan, I guess, who's been multiple famous roles on DS9. He famously plays Odo's father in DS9 in a couple of episodes. He's like the Bajoran scientist who takes care of Odo. He plays the Romulan defector in the TNG classic Defector episode, which is very good in as well. And here he is in Jetrel. So
does he hold the record for most characters with episodes named after him? Being the defector from Defector and being Jetrel.
Two out of Jetrel. Yeah, 2 out of 5 maybe, which is enough.
Well, you remember that episode of Deep Space Nine that was just titled Odo's Dad.
Odo's Dad, part 1 and part 2. Should we count those as separate, or are they just the one piece? We'll have to come up with a rule. No, he what was it? Mara. I think his name was something Mara or something like that. Anyway,
can we get right to the point with this one?
Yeah.
Kes only is going to live for 9 years.
Yes.
Like she a dog
said that in
or
Caretaker.
Something? Did they say? I think
Caretaker? They said that in. I think they said it in Caretaker that her species dies quickly for some reason. Yep.
That makes their relationship a lot weirder, or at least like. Neelix is really playing the long game here, being like, well, I mean, she can come on the ship, but she's not going to be here forever.
Does it make it more okay that she's now essentially middle-aged? And it's not there's no discrepancy here between any kind of age thing or something. Is she middle-aged? If she lives for 8 years and she's 4 years old.
Who's to say how old she is? I don't know. How do we know that Neelix didn't just like pick her up the day she was born? I don't know. Who knows? Who's to say how old she is?
Pod people. Yeah, Cass hasn't been she hasn't been in a lot of the episodes recently. She's sort of barely in this one too, but she has a little bit of a role where she plays Neelix's shoulder to cry on. Jetrel. So it's Voyager does duet, basically.
Yes.
down to the fact that it's the second to last episode of the first season. It has
that's funny.
Villain,
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it has a villain who is played by a charismatic actor who comes on and has a lot of one-on-one scenes with one of our heroes in this one. This episode's fairly well regarded by Voyager reviews and fans. People tend to like this one.
Sorry. Your pause there is that fairly well regarded by Voyager. And I was like, oh, the show thinks
Voyager
quite a lot of this
good.
one, huh? Yeah.
Although Pillar said this is not,
it's great.
Pillar said this one is not a metaphor for the nuclear bombs in Japan, which is an interesting thing to say. Because it's incorrect.
Mr. Pillar, nobody asked you that, but thank you for volunteering that information.
He's clearly left the show at this point, right? He's not working on it. If they bring up a show and he's like, yeah, no, that's not what that metaphor was. People generally like this one. I think some of the patrons have pretty high marks for it. I don't know what I thought this one was just okay. And then it got to the end and I was like, oh, this is worse. This ending has just really fucked everything up. I think it misses everything that makes Duet great. And while I'm sympathetic and like kind of interested in the schism between Jetrel and Neelix, at a certain point, I think this one falls apart for perhaps unfair reasons if you think you're supposed to care about like the stuff that they're talking about. But I think narratively, this completely falls apart with the way that it ends and in a way that it makes no sense. It comes down to our favorite new modern Trek thing of why didn't Jetrel just tell everyone from the start what's going on?
Neelix even says that. It's like, why didn't you just tell us?
There's no good reason.
Yeah.
Does he answer him in the episode? What's the reason for not? He has literally no reason to not tell them what's going on.
I forget. If I had to guess, it was probably something like, I knew you wouldn't trust me or something like that. But
I don't even buy, like, basically once he does that reveal and it's revealed that he's trying to help everybody. And I think everything kind of cascades away from it at that point where it stops making any internal sense down to Janeway and Tuvok's reason to not do it is that they're like, this is too hard. I don't want to do this. And it's like, they don't even have there's not even a sort of moral case about maybe this is disrespectful to the dead to be making these zombie people come back to life. And maybe we should just let sleeping dogs lie. Their rationale is that there's a lot of calculations in this. I don't think we can do this. I don't even want to try.
I kind of read that as that was more than being like, it would be worse to fuck it up than it would to, you know what I mean? Where it's like, if they don't get the calculations right and they brundle fly everybody, it that might be worse. They don't state that explicitly, but that was kind of how.
Yeah, they're not overt about that.
Yeah. But yeah, it's I kind of felt the same way. I was a little bit I didn't mind the turn from Jetrel because I thought it was so I had hoped that his plan was completely impossible. Like, it wasn't even a matter of like, oh, well, this is going to be difficult. I was hoping it would be completely impossible because I liked the idea of this guy who had this theory that basically kind of took over his life and drove him nuts. That stems from this guilt that he has about what he had done to all these people. That ultimately is just, it's not an attainable goal. Like I found that to be interesting and more of a compelling sort of way to end the episode for that character than actually trying it out and getting like a glowy space mime to show up for a second before dissipating back into the ether. Yeah. But yeah, I thought the last bit when they actually kind of were transporting attempting to reintegrate the person was interesting, but it didn't really fit. And I really didn't like the last scene where Neelix just goes in and says, "I forgive you." That kind of felt a fairly unearned to me, and just a quick wrap up.
Yeah.
Which is why I kind of wish that his quest was more explicitly impossible, because I think it would have more impact on Neelix if he could see how this he just really recognized and appreciated that this guy was so absolutely destroyed by this that he's been trying the rest of his life to make it right, but obviously he can't. And that's more, I feel like that breeds more compassion than, oh, I think I can do this. We might be able to do this. Shit, we could have done it if Voyager just had been a little bit more powerful. You know, that's not really that emotionally strong for me.
It's tough because I think I actually prefer the perspective that they bring to it early, when they sort of cast doubt on, like, how responsible should this guy be? And I think he has a fairly compelling argument. He's like, this was an inevitable discovery. Like, I just happened to be the person who was in charge when this stuff was starting to come about. And therefore, you know, it's in my interest to, like, he has an argument about, like, it's my interest for science to discover things and then sort of, like, let people figure out what to do with that information. Like, my job as a scientist is just to go out there and sort of figure stuff out. I think I preferred if there was a continued sense of whether or not they had done anything wrong in that way. I know that you can't use the ending that they have here, but I don't really like the ending that they have here. I think there's a more interesting episode where Jetrel actually fully embodies the Oppenheimer thing about, like, Oppenheimer has some quote that they actually say in the episode, which is that I feel guilty but not remorseful, something like that, which is like that's the kind of attitude that I would find more interesting to have against Neelix. And I think it's maybe a less solvable problem by the end of the episode about what that's supposed to mean. But I don't even know if they're really interested in that. And I don't know if they're interested in making it so that this guy ends his life trying to fix things, when they also go out of their way to have Neelix sort of imply that he's not even really mad at Jetrel for what he did. He's more mad at himself for not being there and going through with his service in the military or whatever. I think it's one of those things that's just like, once the episode is over and I look back on it, it's just like, I don't think any of this really hangs together all that well. I understand the core concepts and, like, the core narrative and the core controversy or, like, conflict that they wanted to have between the characters, but I wasn't that entertained by it. And I also walked away just going like, well, I don't really know if anything interesting actually ended up being said there. In contrast to Duet, which I think has, like, a lot going for it, this one doesn't. I didn't really feel bad for anybody, unfortunately. And I think that that's kind of the main problem with the episode. Like, even Neelix, I don't know. It's like, for some reason, the Duet, like the murder of the Bajorans and the Bajoran treatment feels somehow more empathetic or, like, impactful than the atomic bomb dropping. I don't know why. That doesn't really make a lot of sense, but for some reason it doesn't land the same way.
No, I think you're right, because in Deep Space Nine, the Bajoran and Cardassian conflict is a central conflict of the show. It's something that's been there since the first episode and has been simmering underneath since then. Whereas this conflict is, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first time any of this has been brought up. And so there's no connection to it, really. And even when Neelix is telling his story, his story about being a coward or whatever, I had a hard time really tracking it and really feeling that bad, because I wasn't even really I was as confused as Kess was, let's put it that way, because he's like, well, remember when I told you that I did this? I didn't do this because I was here. I wished I was there, but then I hadn't been there, so I couldn't have happened to me as well. And Kess is like, I'm sorry. Could you where, what planet? What planet were you on?
Yeah.
And
it's a little confusing because the place that this happens is not their homeworld. It's a moon on the homeworld. So it's like this strange, he's at Talax, I guess, which is his home planet, but it's the moon off of Talax. So there's a lot of places you can be at the same time. And he was down on the homeworld planet when the moon got attacked. And so you have to sort of track all this information as to what's going on. I actually had I was going to come in with another, what I thought was a big question, which is that why does Neelix, if Neelix was not there during the attack, why does he not question his diagnosis? But I guess that he must have gone back on a rescue mission.
Yeah,
right? Is that what he did?
He had been going back on rescue missions.
So he actually went to the planet to rescue people, and that was not faked. Okay. So
yeah, that's how he saw the little girl who had been burnt up and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, I thought he had been making up that story. Like, I thought that's how far into his delusion he was. But what changed that for me is the dream sequence where they actually showed that it's like, oh, he must have seen something. Yeah.
Yeah. It also is a weird. He's a weird character to choose to tell the story with, because ultimately what he's saying is a fairly interesting point of view for him to have when he admits this thing to Kess, where he says that he was supposed to be in the army, but he didn't join the army because he didn't believe the war. He didn't believe in the war. So he was a conscientious objector, basically. And so that meant that he wasn't on the moon when his family was killed. And so he basically has survivor's guilt based on the decisions that he made, choosing to sit things out and sort of be not a deserter, but just not join the army. And that is a interesting character beat for him, for someone to have to take on all of this guilt based on an ethical position that they held at the time. So to have him be a pacifist or a conscious objector or whatever, and then also then be a someone directly impacted by more warfare, and how does that change his mind, and how does that make him feel? And it creates all these feelings of anger towards the whatever the Jetrel people are called.
Harkonians, I think that's almost like the Dune reference. I think they're the Hakonians or something. Yeah.
Which, and so that anger is then mixed, that intense anger is then mixed with his own guilt. And I do find that pretty interesting. I just don't know if it really works 100%, the way that they kind of want it to. And I think what they're trying to do here as well is present two sides to both Neelix and Jetrel as far as how they approach and how they feel about things, obviously, because, Jetrel, when he's talking to Neelix, he's saying what you're saying, where he's like, yeah, what was I supposed to do? I'm just a scientist. And Neelix pushes back on that in a way that I think is totally fair, where he's like, well, yeah, I mean, you could have said something. And he's like, well, it wouldn't have done anything. And it's like, well, you still could have said it. You could have at least tried. And then later that shell is cracked, obviously, and reveals that he is incredibly remorseful about it, in a way that sort of reminded me a bit of the guy from Enterprise. Who's that? The guy who builds the weapon for the Xindi, that Archer goes down and tells him what they're doing with it and stuff.
Dago?
Sure.
What's that guy's name?
I don't know.
Diego? Can't remember. It's been a long time.
So yeah, I like Degra. That's right. So I like what they're trying to do as far as, you have these two surface level opinions of the situation, which then you break down and find that the true emotional feelings are different. But yeah, I don't think it really follows through as tightly as Duet does. And I mean, it's tough to compare those two because Duet's a fantastic episode.
I think people compare these two similar. The Tor.com review said that this is perhaps better than Duet, which I thought was, I think I'm getting the reviews right, which is just, it's an interesting opinion. He gave it a 10 out of 10. Wow. Well, I think that I think what's really suffers for me is that Duet is like this clear focus about what it's about. And I feel like this one is like, it's a mix of metaphors, like down to, it's about the atomic bomb, but Neelix's objections to fighting is more of a Vietnam thing. So it's just like every war is getting piled into each other. And you're like, well, it's a cleaner metaphor if you stick to one conflict and you have like a sense of what he's actually fighting.
I mean, sure,
because if you start mixing the effects of the different wars, it just becomes this sort of grand anti-war sentiment type thing. And that loses focus on what the central conflict between Jetrel and Neelix is. If you just start going like, yeah, war is a bitch, isn't it? And then they go, I guess, like it loses the specificity that you have from this conflict, which is supposed to be the atomic bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima and stuff like that. I think that's what the focus of it is to be, down to Jetrel being Oppenheimer. But if you just start throwing everything in there, you end up confused right down to the fact of Neelix. When you said he's not a deserter, he's an objector to the war. It's true, but Neelix also says that on Talix, his planet, if you don't fight, it's a death sentence. So, like, that's what surprises me about him going to the rescue mission, is that felt like, to me, that's when Neelix's journey of going off into space on his own was. He abandoned his planet because he had to leave, because otherwise he's going to be killed. But apparently he doesn't fight in the war, and then is just running through rescue missions, and no one holds him accountable at that point. He pulls a Don Draper or something, and he just sort of pretends that he was in the war. So I think I think there's just a lot of different things that are confused about it, down to the theology of it, or not theology, but the ideology, and then Netflix's response to everything.
Netflix's response?
Netflix, yeah. Which one would you rather cancel, Netflix or Neelix at this point?
You know, honestly, it doesn't bother me that much that they're kind of mixing things, because I don't think that it's about the one-to-one event as much as it is just about general, like, responsibility and the feelings of responsibility and how that weighs on people in these situations. And I understand that the protesting the war was something that is much more tied to Vietnam, but I think you could apply that to any war if you really wanted to. But it is like the one thing people remember about Vietnam is the protests, really. But
well, yeah, I mean,
you come out culture anyway.
You come out as incorrect if you were opposing World War II. You know, if you were just like, whatever happens, like, that's fine. If you're Swiss or whatever, no one respects you, so you had to become bankers. Because
I mean, you know, because you've got it has some elements of, like, World War I built into it as well. Because I mean, in World War I, it was everybody who was of fighting age had to go into the war, and if you didn't sign up, then you were an outcast and you were shunned by literally everybody. So it's got a bit of that baked into it too. So it's got some. I felt like it was more about responsibility of actions than it was necessarily about the one-to-one of which war and which event they were trying to use.
Yeah. But all right, so if you're making a statement about the morality of the atomic bombings of Japan, Neelix,
I would say though, while yes, I think that is a way you could go. I don't think, and it is just by, like, the size of the number of people who are killed, that seems to be the easiest way to go. But I think you could still apply that to any large-scale weapon of mass destruction from any war, whether it's gas. Because, I mean, it's a gas, right? So it's basically a giant biological gas attack.
Oh, I mean, I find this to be almost unequivocally a nuclear attack. It's like it's a one bombing event that kills that many people.
Yeah, I think it is closer to that, but I think it is the application. I think you could put to any large-scale WMD type situation.
Yes, but Jetrel's clearly Oppenheimer. Like, he's clearly someone who's supposed to be regretful of inventing this technology. So it can't just be a regular bomb, because anyone can build that, and no one seems to care. But the idea of building a huge bomb,
I know, you're right. Don't ask me how I know.
You can browse the internet. What's that right wing militia book? The Anarchist Cookbook, is that what? No, the real one. The one that, like, McVeigh read.
Oh, the something papers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I forget what it's called.
I can't remember. some shitty novel that tells you how to make bombs. Because I think it's so clearly a nuclear allegory that it's interesting that Neelix's stand is apparently to take an objector stance against the people who use that on him. So in some ways, he's almost siding with the Hakonians in some way, it sounds like, because he doesn't feel that this war is worth fighting. But then his family gets bombed. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I just like, if the intent is to just make a soupy mess of an episode where there's a lot of different stuff going on and you're just kind of generally talking about war, I guess this is a success. But I feel that the episodes generally work better if there's a little bit of a focus on the one thing or event that they're talking about. Like in Duet, it's about the not doing anything in the face of evil is what Duet is about.
Sure.
But this is about A, not doing anything in the face of evil, being an objector to war in general, and then feeling bad that your family gets killed, and then trying to resurrect the dead after that. And it's like, there's too much stuff going on here. You're not focusing enough on any of these in particular to make it a strong enough episode.
Yeah, that's what I found. God, excuse me. That's what I found so interesting about Neelix's point of view is that what they're the thing they're saying about his own sense of responsibility and guilt that he feels is interesting to me. But like coming out of the other side of it, when you really kind of look at exactly what he's saying and what he did, it is kind of the episode is kind of taking a stance on the side of or against conscientious objecting or pacifism
in this situation. Yeah. Well, because it's using a World War II metaphor instead of Vietnam.
Right.
It's not going deep enough to make it a Vietnam allegory.
Yeah, and I mean, if you extrapolate that out straight into the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you're essentially presenting a Japanese person who thought that the war shouldn't have been fought with America, and then once they drop the bomb, they become aggressively anti-American, which I'm sure did happen. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. But it is an interesting way to take a character like Neelix, who is not exactly the most political character I've ever seen in Star Trek. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I was reading a thing about Westmore's design is that Neelix was apparently designed to be very toyable. Like he was easily turned into a toy was part of his design.
Every kid wants a fucking hairy ass gremlin
hairy troll doll
Neelix toy for Christmas.
I was just laughing. They made his he was saying that in contrast to a lot of Star Trek species, I'd never noticed this, but he said that he intentionally made Neelix's face round as opposed to angular, which was his way of working with most other species for whatever reason.
Interesting.
But he does have a little plump face with silly hair. Yeah, I don't know. I feel that this one just kind of missed the whole way through. I thought that it was fine, but it was not really. The scenes where Neelix is talking to him and then talking to Kes didn't really grab me. I wasn't really enthralled by any of that stuff. And Jetrel's. The most excited I got was when Jetrel started making his goo monster in the lab, and then he knocked out Neelix, and I was like, "Oh, this guy's actually evil, and something badass is going to happen."
Well, when they didn't go
that way,
when they did that, and they finally explained what was going on, and everything was said and done, my first thought was like, "So, how many of those people don't get reformed now because they are some sort of goo creature?" Because he took a random sampling of vaporized particles and put them together in some sort of monstrosity.
I don't think it's ever clear. Was that a collection of people? I thought he was, when that was done and he started talking about he was going to resurrect people, I thought then he was going to show them that blob monster and be like, look what I've done. And they all go like, oh my God, this is horrifying. Like we can't allow you to do this. I thought that they were going to make him clearly insane at that point. Like that's the point where his facade cracks and he's like, I'm going to bring everyone back and no one's going to convince me otherwise. That's not the way it is. And the other bad thing about the ending, I think, is that Duet didn't need a lot of really bad technobabble to get its point across.
Sure.
And the ending of this Voyager episode is just like, let's realign the atomic particles of a cloud, and then we'll use the transporter to bufferize them at various percents of integrity. And so it's like, oh my goodness, this is not very good.
I will say though, I continue to be tickled by how giddy Janeway gets regarding like technical stuff, because this whole episode, she was just on the outside kind of like really into the technical stuff and not really caring about much of the specifics of the war between these two people. Because it's
very,
like
kind to him.
Yeah, like
Jetrel, when he beams on, she's like, oh doctor, like let me give you let's bring you to the spa and have a nice stay on Voyager. It's like, this guy is kind of an enemy of your main cast member. Interesting.
Yeah, I did really like though that Janeway does take them off course to go back and try and do this thing that Jetrel claims that he wants to do, because it does seem it is something like that a Starfleet captain or Janeway specifically would do, is to be like, all right, this guy's trying to help people, we have the capacity to do it, so let's go and give him some help.
But that brings up to me, what exactly are they doing? Why are they still able to turn around and go back to where they found Neelix at this point?
Great question.
In the episode, they mentioned it. They're like, oh, that's a little bit of a delay. It's not a little bit of a delay. You're going back to where you started this whole thing at. Yeah. And for Neelix, of all people, he's not even really Starfleet. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah, they talk about it. They talk about it in the pool scene at the beginning, that maybe the balance is off on the ship. Maybe the alignment's off, and they've just been slightly going to the left the whole time, and so they are actually just doing a giant intergalactic circle.
Am I missing the metaphor of the safety to put someone in an unwinnable situation? I mean, I guess it's a metaphor for the conflict between the two of the characters, but maybe it could have been a little bit better. I still like Paris's Shefuk place. This program is kind of nice, and I wish that they spent more time there. It's interesting.
Yeah. What did you think of the
very nice bar vibe?
What did you think of the dream sequence?
Pretty bad, I thought. Not awful. But I thought the burn makeup was fine and everything. Like it's one of those dream sequences that it is a paint by the numbers dream sequence. It does all the things that you do in a dream sequence, which including turn the person that you're chasing around and it's you, and then you look at each other and you wake up. It's all that stuff.
They took that a step further too, where all of the other characters who were talking had Neelix's voice, even though it was Janeway and Paris and et cetera, et cetera. So. Yeah,
it was fine. Was it? Would you cut that if you had to? Seems cuttable, right? I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, I think a story like this, if you can't let it sit on its own merits, then a dream sequence isn't going to help convince people that it's better. You know, like, because even at the end of that talk with Kess, Neelix essentially says something like, maybe I'm just projecting onto this guy from my own, what I feel about myself, but I still also hate him too. And it's like, okay, so I'm not really sure where we're going here. What's the realization that he's having about, Yeah,
I mean, the final comparison to Duet is that by the end of Duet, I understand why Kira would feel sympathetic towards I forget what that guy's name is now. The clerk. He was the clerk. Whatever. I'm not going to remember. But here, as you were saying, I'm a little bit confused. I'm not super confused. I can kind of see it, but it doesn't really feel right the way that Neelix and him end things. I think it's like kind of feels like it has to end that way, but I don't know. There's not a clarity to that through line where I feel that I totally understand this sequence where Neelix is going to come in and say, I forgive you to him. Only because it's confused again. Does Neelix feel bad for himself and realize that he's been unfair to this guy? Or is it the guy trying to resurrect all these people that Neelix is like, oh, you're actually trying to do a good thing, therefore this is all okay what you did? It's kind of sloppy.
Well, Yeah, I mean, that's why I wish that they hadn't even had the chance to do it, and it was just more that this guy was grasping at straws to deal with his own guilt, because I think that's more that's way more sympathetic to me than shit, we almost got it, you know? Theoretically,
yes.
they could if they went back and got like a couple more ships or something, or some extra juice, maybe they could have done it. But if it's something that's completely impossible, and this guy is just so racked with guilt that he's gone this far to try and do it, and it's, you know, he's dying and he's breaking down because of it, I think there's room there for Neelix to sympathize a bit more.
Yeah.
I don't know if even there I would have Neelix forgive him, or maybe have like
if he doesn't bring people back, Neelix not forgiving him makes a little bit more sense if you're saying that some things cannot be corrected, like some mistakes are too grave to allow for a. Then you get into the whole metaphysical thing about whether or not it's like right to hold it against him, I guess, at that point, if it's like, if it was an honest mistake or something.
I didn't mean to discover nuclear fission. It just happened.
He could have been going for an energy source, you know?
That's true. Yeah, good point.
It's a bomb.
Warp bomb. Yeah.
Yep, warp bomb.
I think it would be interesting if they had the scene where Neelix says he forgives him, and then there's another tag after that where he talks to Kes, and Kes is like, wow, that was really big of you to do that. And he says something like, oh, I don't forgive him, but I just don't think that he needs to. He's dying anyway. There's even someone like him. Yeah, even someone like him deserves a little bit of reprieve on their last. You know, something like that, where it's like he's doing it for this guy because this guy's so clearly tortured by what he did, but that doesn't necessarily change how Neelix feels about what actually happened.
Yeah, I understand that. I think if it had ended that way, I'd be similarly confused about like, where's this go? It feels like another step of like, let's just turn right here to make this like an apology for Neelix, and you go, what an interesting, strange choice that they decided to do that in this story. I don't know. I think that comes, like, our discussion about it here is just it comes down to the fact that it's difficult to pinpoint kind of what this is about in any sense, that it's like, oh, this is the story that's being told here, and this is why Neelix apologizes. This is why this guy is so dedicated to bringing these people back. This is why Neelix was a conscientious objector and stuff like that. But I don't know. Again, to me, it just feels like it's all a little bit too pureed from a bunch of different parts. Is there anything else in this one? Not really. Got a couple Paris and Chakotay and Janeway things. Tuvok's in it for a little bit. Fake Kramer is in it. No, I guess that's it, pretty much. So we'll go to the wrap-up then. Go to our final thoughts. Thanks, everybody, for listening to our coverage of Jetrel today. Hope you enjoyed the content. If you did, patreon.com/The Pensky File is the best way to support the show. Patreon.com/The Pensky File. A couple dollars a month to get extra stuff. Coverage of Star Trek Strange New Worlds is ongoing right now. We did Picard Season 2. Clay and Amanda have Stephen King's second string thing going for a Rotten Horror Picture Show. Occasionally some badass stuff. All the good stuff. Patreon.com/The Pensky File. And as always, our Captain Tier supporters get a special thank you, which special thank you this time goes out to Ben Douglas, Tark Latif, Andrew Sherlock, Joint Mango, Christian Pouch, Carol Barrett, Mike Burnett, Matthew Ross, Michael Pond, Matt Cutler, Nick Sergey, Grim Santos, Sean, Brendan Howells, Bradley Killens, Vol 13 Hero, Dwayne Hackett, Kevin Rice, Jordan Cooper, Russell Owens, Stephen Min, Darth Moss, HH28, Derek Zajac, Paul Roscoe, Jake123, Patrick Seba, Dave Davies, Poindexter G, Barry Wallace, Jamie Crow, Captain Brazen, Eric Santuan, Jake Keys, Kamer, William Scheisler, Nick the Rat, Rayhan Jaffer, Grapple, John Zorn, Zane Majors, Olivier Pardieu, Tom Hickey, Jose Hunter, CW Enough Remixes, Captain Punchhouse, James McFlynn, Tommy Tango, Jonas, 2 Weeks Must Die, Diz Brother, Admiral Nakamura, Ed Mark Starr, Chris McLaughlin, Royo, Jeremy Boudreau, J-Man, Alec DeWolf, The Undiscovered Mugado, Robbie Duffield, Will Clay, Atango Udom, Artorius, Zaylan Maru, and Jaron Hatch. Thanks, everybody, for supporting the show. So now we'll go to our comments. If you're at a $5 and up level, you can leave your comments. We read them, respond to them. Norman Buckwell says, Jetrel, the attempted duet in Voyager, it's not bad. We finally learn a lot about Neelix in this episode, and it's one of the rare times when he's not a run-it-and-gag comic relief type of character. Jetrel is definitely an interesting character, and the references to Hiroshima and Nagasaki are obvious but good. The attempted experiment of bringing back the dead, well, you'll see this again in Season 4 of Enterprise, and I liked the original better. 4 magic transporter resurrections out of 5.
When do they do
resurrection in Enterprise?
Yeah, I don't know.
So the episode is Daedalus. It's the transporter. Emery Erickson, the inventor of the transporter with his dead son, lost in space, and tries to transport him to bring him back from that.
Right.
So that makes sense.
About that one.
I think I liked Daedalus better than this one, maybe. So maybe I disagree with Norman a little bit about that one. Next, James McLennan says, 2 solid episodes in a row. How long can this hot streak last? Ethan Phillips really puts in his all and adds a lot of empathy and gravitas to his character. Characterization of Jetrel is essentially a remorseful Oppenheimer equivalent. It's interesting, and Sloyan is excellent in the role as he always is. The resurrection plan is, of course, pure nonsense, but the fact that it doesn't work is what makes it really click into place. 4 guest characters played by James Sloyan out of 5. I think that might actually be an interesting rating that's true, factually true. Jonas says, Jetrel, does anyone really care about Neelix? The episode is well executed, but I cannot help finding Neelix insufferable, especially when he is, for a long time, the center of attention. He's a one-note Johnny here. Lieutenant Worf says the word Kittimer fewer times in an entire series than Neelix says the word Rhinax, the moon he grew up on, in this episode. Rhinax, I can't remember. Or at least it feels that way.
I've taken that. Gave me horrible arthritis.
Taken that? Yeah, it's
Rhinax.
It's the generic arthritis drug. A latte librarian says, Jetrel, it's very subtle, but I think this episode is about nuclear bombs. It is subtle. Aaron Millian says, why is Kes usually in sickbay except when it's convenient for the doctor to be deactivated? I really dislike Neelix, thus I don't like this episode. Good Trek message here about forgiveness at the end, although that seemed a bit of a stretch given that Neelix's family has been wiped out. 1 out of 5. Matt
I know.
Ross
Would
says,
it have been a better episode if the guy's dying and Neelix comes over and touches his hand and just goes, I hope you rot in hell.
Just watches him breathe his last breath and go out. Did he die at the end, or was he just shutting his eyes?
Oh, I don't know. Not sure. My question is, so he didn't have any way to cure that disease? That was all of that was a ruse?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. All right.
Yep. Yeah. Weird disease too. You're pretty much okay until the moment you die. And then it's just, there's no downgrading of yourself.
Well,
you
I
stumbled
mean,
once.
Yeah, at a certain point you go, then that's briefly passes.
It is a strange sci-fi disease. Jetrel from Matt Ross says, coming out as an anti-war and an anti-nuclear war, the shock of the A-bomb dropped on Japan. The story deals with many issues and shows the side of Neelix that needed to be shown more frequently. Neelix shows emotion that may explain his defensive joviality. Jetrel as Oppenheimer and his shock at developing the A-bomb was ably played by James Sloyan and believable. The only unintentionally funny line is the name of the survivor being Palaxia from Talaxia. Otherwise, a good story that conveyed its message without a sledgehammer, something New Trek misses entirely. 4 guilty minds out of 5.
I've heard that limerick. There once was a Talaxian named Palaxia. See, what's interesting about this to me is why I gravitate more towards it being not. I mean, obviously, it is about nuclear war and the nuclear bomb, but at least in the analog that's for the event. But that's why I gravitate more towards it being about like responsibility for actions in war and stuff like that, because like who in 1997 or wherever this is like feels like it's a hot take that maybe the atomic bomb wasn't a great idea. You know what I mean? Like it's not it's such an easy mark to be like we're making a direct comparison to the dropping of the atomic bomb and stuff like that. It seems like there's more meat on the bone if you're just talking about if you're focusing on more on the responsibility and the way that guilt weighs and with actions and stuff like that than it is about like, oh, this is an anti-atomic bomb episode.
Yeah. Well, I guess I would say I don't see it as particularly anti-nuclear weaponry in the sense that you can be sort of pro-nuclear weaponry, but it's almost less about the tech and more about just like what you're supposed to feel for developing it, I suppose, and opening Pandora's box there. Maybe that's a very small difference. It doesn't really matter. I think this came out on the 50th anniversary or close. Like this year was the 50th anniversary of the bomb.
Oh, interesting.
Which is why.
Okay. Yeah,
and
sure.
Like this is not our first. The other thing is that this is not our first Voyager episode to deal with nuclear weapons. They had the one where they went into the past and they got wiped out by the atomic bomb that Janeway caused by going there. It was like the third episode, time and again. Hey guys, really sorry, but Clay's internet gave out at this point and a little bit of the recording got scrambled. So this is the best I could do to save the edit. We are missing some things, some patron comments. I apologize for that, but it is what it is. So I apologize. We'll try to get the internet sorted out, and hopefully this won't happen again in the future. Sorry. Was used for horrible destruction, Dr. Marcus's Genesis device being the most prominent. But here it went straight to World War II analogies. Jetrel is Robert Oppenheimer, and we see revealed in him many of the same post-war demons that haunted his real-life counterpart. It's some tough questions that are asked, the biggest being, can forgiveness ever be given? In this case, the answer is yes, but still had to be a price for atonement. Ethan Phillips is given his first really great material to work with, and James Sloyan is always great in his Trek roles. Thanks very much for that. Woodrow says, in the last 3 episodes, Voyager is haunted, encounters a mad scientist, and now a Neelix episode. When will the horror end? Odo's dad is great as the scientist, and the story makes me wonder which, if any, of the Tuskegee, I think, right, experiment or Manhattan Project scientists ever tried to make amends. I almost cried when I found out Neelix did not have neutremia, but all in all, a good episode. 3.5 out of 5. It's neutremia, right, which sounds like a diet drug. In this episode that's filled with diet words or science words. Undiscovered Mugado says, Jetrel, Alien, Giraffe, Lion, Neelix has a halfway decent arc in this one. It didn't chicken out either in how it handled space. Joseph everyone, it's Mengele, right? It's not Mengali. I always want to pronounce it Mengali. At least up until he conveniently died. His attempt to beam back the dead Talaxians was suitably gruesome and sad. Oh, I just looked it up, and the writer said it was a Hiroshima metaphor. Oh, damn, Jetrel wasn't space Mengele. He was space Robert Oppenheimer. Look at the correction in real time on these comments. 4, are we the baddies out of 5? I should put a poll up for what people actually think about the atomic bombing, whether or not it was justified. I was reading something was talking about this idea that if America hadn't developed it, it would have been prohibitively expensive for other countries to develop it, and therefore would not likely have been developed, which is interesting. So basically, America was the only economy that was able to support it, and if America had failed, other countries maybe perhaps would not have tried to pursue it because of how prohibitively expensive it is to develop the technology. That doesn't seem right to me. I almost buy Jetrel's argument in this more, that it's like it's kind of inevitable. It just seems, the science seems inevitable, and eventually cost will come down to a point where you're allowed to do those kinds of things and discover them. Changeling says, I think I'm in the minority here, but I think this episode sucks. It sucks for the same reason Duet is great. The villain, Jetrel, never gives any pushback, rationalization, or even a sadistic taunt. He's just there for Neelix to vent his rage, so we think this episode is more important than it is. 1 heavy hand out of 5. Corporal John Zorn. James Sloyan is the one multi-alien Trek guest actor who's so distinctive that no amount of makeup can cover him up. As with his roles as the Romulan Admiral Jarek and Odo's discoverer Morapol, he carries the episode. It's neither here nor there, but I sort of think that all 3 of these roles are as the same character in a way I don't feel about characters played by Vaughn, Armstrong, or Jeffrey Combs. Ethan Phillips acts well, but the writers have done little to make Neelix a sympathetic or likable character at this point. I wish they had. For me, this episode would have been more palatable if it had centered around a different Voyager crew member somehow. Yes, I would show this to someone as a good example of a Voyager episode, which is a definition of a 4 out of 5. Oops. Eric McGowan says, Neelix, especially early Neelix, tends to be annoying, but it's episodes like this that really help his character. Giving such a normally jovial and downright buffoonish character such a dark backstory works well and gives the actor Ethan Phillips more to work with. Brendan Howell says, I'm with Changeling on this one. It sucks because Neelix in it, and Neelix annoys me. I'm sure it would have been a better episode with someone else as the victim. Kess, maybe? Jetrel's plan to resurrect the victims of the Metreon Cascade is even less plausible than Emery Erickson trying to get his son out of the transporter buffer after 15 years. 2 cases of Neutremia plague out of 5. Final comment, Royo says, this episode always annoys me with its juvenile take on Oppenheimer for inventing a weapon, not deploying it, mind you, for developing it. Do we call Dr. Richard J. Gatling a mass murderer for inventing the machine gun? It was then that Oppenheimer famously told Truman that I feel I have blood on my hands, which was unacceptable to Truman, who immediately replied that there was no concern of Oppenheimer's, and that if anyone had bloody hands, it was the president. October 1945. Worst of all, this episode turns Oppenheimer into a straw man of himself with criminally weak justifications and is unable to defend himself, which when put in context against the historical Manhattan Project that was in the competition with the Axis nuclear weapon programs, makes the episode's comparisons absurd because Oppenheimer knew what he was doing. The writers have made this story so similar to the dropping of the atomic bomb on Japan, even down to the casualty numbers and survivors developing degenerative blood problems, but then set the scenario of the development and deployment of the Metreon Cascade to be so dissimilar to the Manhattan Project and World War II that it leaves this allegory broken and destroys whatever point it was trying to make. 1.5 out of 5. That's it. Thanks, everybody, for leaving your thoughts. Patreon.com/The File is the place to support the show. If you're so inclined, you can leave your comments there, too. They're on the Patreon post for these things. And that's it. We're done with Jetrel. Clay told me via text that he gives this one a high 3. I give it a 2, I think. Clay seemed to like it more than I did. I find it kind of a jumbled mess, and I don't find the drama of it particularly convincing or empathetic or anything like that. I don't really relate to Neelix and this guy in a way that I relate to the duet relationship between Kira and that Cardassian. I just think that it's kind of fuzzy. It's just a little bit of a fuzzy episode that doesn't have a plot that I can sort of sink into in terms of understanding everything that's going on and all the motivations and stuff like that. So I'll give it a 2. I think it's slightly below average. I would skip this one on rewatch. Don't really agree with the super positive reviews for it, but taste is subjective, as they say. Clay gives it a 3. I give it a 2. That's Jetrel. We'll be back with the final episode of the season next week, which is learning curve, I think, right? That's what it's called. So we'll be back with that. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Thank you for supporting the show. Apologies about the technical difficulties. We'll see what we can do about it. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll see you next time.